You know, I really miss my political lecturer. Yeah, I really miss him. Because at times like this, we would have had a discussion about the state of affairs in Kenya, the fight against corruption, the future of Kenya, the prophecies of what is going to happen in Kenya, yeah, the tsunami prophecy. We'd have discussed all that. Now, that would have been very, very interesting, I'm sure, for this channel. Looking back now, there are things which I've remembered, and I realized I was being prepared for this channel to do the job which I'm doing now, and which is being appreciated by Kenyans, and which I'm very honored to do for a better Kenya. I will give you one example. When my political lecturer retired, he used to have a habit of reading all the newspapers, and that would include the now defunct Kenya Times. Of course, he'd start with The Nation, move over to the Standard, and read all the newspapers. And he would really look forward to my next visit. And of course, when I arrived, immediately we dived into politics. And there are several times I got embarrassed because he'd mentioned a story. I mean, he's deep in the rural areas. Yeah, no access to television in those days because there was no electricity. Okay, so he has only his newspapers. So he mentioned something to me that I have no idea about. And so after a while, I realized that reading only The Nation every day, yeah, and taking in KTN primetime news daily was not enough for me to face my political lecturer. I would have to be prepared. Now, that taught me a very valuable lesson. And the lesson is this. Quite often, the very small stories, yeah, a very small 2-paragraph story tucked away at the back of the newspaper somewhere very far, yeah, was extremely important, much more important than the headlines. And many times, that small story could easily be linked to the major headlines of the newspaper, either that day or the previous day. And so, folks, you're benefiting from all this, yeah, all this intensive. So when I call him a political lecturer, I'm serious. Anyway, today I have a real treat for you, okay? What I'm going to do, we're going to have a guest, yep, right on this channel, yeah? And we're going to break down and discuss the current state of affairs in the country, okay? And of course, you've guessed, it'll be my political lecturer. Yeah, I'm going to bring him back from the grave so that we have a discussion. And I assure you, it is not going to be boring. Because one of the things you'll quickly notice is that we never shared the same views. There is another reason why the view of my political lecturer is very important, especially for now. Over the years, I realized something, okay? His views were exactly the same views as those of our intelligence community. Yes, the National Intelligence Service. In my view, this kind of thinking has been overtaken by the times, yeah? And that's one of the reasons why the country suffers. So it's okay for my political lecturer to have such views, yeah, because his views don't impact on policy. They don't impact on what happens in our country. However, for our intelligence community to still be stuck in a time warp, it's not good for the country. But those are the views that run the country. And that's why I was saying in a recent recording, for those who are regulars here, that we need an injection of new blood into our intelligence community. New thinking. Anyway, I'm sure you've gotten my point. And therefore, during the discussion that's coming, yeah, take careful note of those points, the way he presents them. Because that's exactly the way our major decision makers in the intelligence community think, and it impacts our country. Anyway, let's go straight into it, okay? Immediately after the brief commercial break. You don't want to miss this. welcome back, and a very warm welcome to this special show, where on the show I have my political lecturer. Welcome to the show, sir. And we'll kick off the discussion with a question I will pose to my political lecturer, okay? And the question goes as follows. Now, I've brought you up to speed with what is happening in our country concerning the fight against corruption. Maybe you can start with a few views, or with your views, on what you think of corruption in Kenya. You know, what really went wrong and where we went wrong, yeah? And what can be done to get out of the current mess. And then maybe also comment on whether you believe the current fight against corruption is serious. Over to you.
Oh gosh, that is quite a question. Now, I've always told you that we lost the battle against corruption in 1972. Or was it 1971? That is when I knew Kenya is finished. What happened is that a man called Mathenge, I believe he was Rift Valley Provincial Commissioner, met the MP for Lamu, Abonasomo, on the corridors of the High Court, and Mathenge slapped him. This was over the Karafu scandal, involving Zanzibar. I've told you about that story several times. You know it. That was a clear indication to me that the government supported corruption, and corruption was part of the government. I knew that from then on, Kenya would never turn back. There would be no turning back for the country, and things would only get worse. I'm not surprised about what is happening in Kenya. We knew a long time ago that this is exactly where we're headed. And it'll get worse. What fight against corruption are you talking about? There's no fight against corruption in Kenya. There will never be, as long as the government of Kenya remains the way it is. How many fights against corruption have we seen since independence? Almost every president has had their own fight against corruption. And it has gone nowhere. And it all started in 1972 with that incident I've told you about.
Thank you very much, sir. Now, maybe it's a good idea to bring the rest of our audience up to date or up to speed concerning what my political lecturer is referring to. Okay, the incident in the 70s. That was really the turning point for Kenya as far as institutionalizing corruption is concerned. And folks, it was a very, very dramatic saga. Okay, what had happened is that there was a Karafu scandal. Karafu is clubs. Now, Zanzibar in those years was very well known for an export called clubs. Clubs are spices, okay, or Karafu in Kiswahili. They were fetching a very high price in the Middle East. And the country, Zanzibar, which at that time was part of Tanzania, the Zanzibar had merged with Tanganyika to form a country called Tanzania, okay? But the country was semi-autonomous, still is, okay? It had its own governorship, its own rulers, it still is, And what had happened is that the situation had gotten so serious about this smuggling of clubs from Zanzibar that the small island had quickly changed their laws and brought up death penalty upon anybody caught smuggling clubs from the island. Now, of course, the chief schemers of that particular scam were very, very senior big fish in the Kenyan government at that time. And the way it worked is that they took maize, they used small boats, filled them with maize, and then took them to Zanzibar from Mombasa. And when they arrived in Zanzibar, they sold the maize at a very high price. 300 shillings in those years was an absolute fortune. And then, after they had sold the maize, been paid their huge fortune, they loaded the boats with gloves. Now, they took this Karafu and took it back to Mombasa and then exported it to the Middle East for a very high profit. Because at that time, the price for this particular commodity in the Middle East was very high. It was at its highest. And this Karafu in the region was only found in Zanzibar. The Zanzibari government had complained very bitterly to Kenya, but the country had done nothing about it, and the trade continued. And so what happened in Parliament in 1971, the issue came up in Parliament, and the then Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs Bwana Burudi Nabwera stood up in parliament and he did something very brave. He revealed the names of all the big fish involved in the Carrefour corruption scam, or rather smuggling scam. Okay? And the people he named were Paul Ngei, who was Minister of Housing at that time in the Kenyatta government, very close to President Jomo Kenyatta, and then Sheikh Balala, who was the Assistant Minister for Finance, Eliud Mahiu, very powerful police commissioner Coast, Isaiah Madhenge, Provincial Commissioner Rift Valley, Gideon Wandera, who was then the acting Commissioner of Customs, and Bwana Judah Mwoka, who was an Assistant Commissioner of Police, I believe in charge of Coast Province. Now what followed was pandemonium, because the people named dared Nabwera to repeat that statement outside Parliament, because within Parliament there's parliamentary Parliament privilege, over what you say. You're protected by law, and it seems that those years they enforced that more than today, because today Kenyans can't even notice the difference of saying something within Parliament and outside. That is lost. But in those days, parliamentary tradition and procedure was enforced. So they dared him to repeat his remarks outside Parliament. And Bwana Burudi Nabwera was in serious trouble. Now Nabwera had been given those names by a legislator from Lamu called Bwana Abu Somo. Being in Lamu, of course, he was very close to the action where this scandal was unfolding, where this smuggling was unfolding, and therefore he had that information at his fingertips. And he passed on that information to Bwana Nabwera, who was brave enough to name names in Parliament. But corruption fought back viciously. Under intense pressure, Bwana Nabwera was forced to reveal his source of information. And he revealed that actually he had been given the information by Bwana Abu Somo, who was the legislator for Lamu. Now, as pressure mounted over this exposure of corrupt people within government, what happened next was Bwana Abu Somo was forced to confess in Parliament that actually he had lied. The information he had given was false. But of course, everybody knew this information was not false. Everybody knew this information was 100% accurate. But the powers that be, especially the Kiambu Mafia, had forced the poor man to do exactly as they wanted. Now, it was a dirty trick, because after he confessed, he was picked up and charged in court for giving false information. And in 1972, he was convicted, found guilty, and jailed for 18 months. And therefore, the incident my political lecturer was referring to was after the judgment had been passed. Bwana Mathenge, who was one of the people named, met Bwana Somo on the corridors of the High Court. The person was being taken away. And he slapped he slapped Bwana Somo right there. Now, ordinarily, strictly speaking, according to the law, Bwana Mathenge should have been charged for assault. You don't just slap anybody anywhere when you feel like it. But absolutely nothing happened to Bwana Mathenge. That was one of the first cases of impunity rearing its ugly head. And Bwana Somo went to jail for 18 months, and that maneno ended there. There's another fascinating bit of information here. As all these manenos was unfolding, what happened was that 12 Kenyans had been arrested in Zanzibar, and they were waiting to be hanged. You remember I mentioned to you earlier on, Zanzibar had passed a new law that anybody found involved in smuggling would be hanged. And so these 12 Kenyans were on death row. Now what happened is that President Jomo Kenyatta traveled all the way to Lungalunga. Lungalunga is the border between Tanzania and Kenya. He traveled from Mombasa by road. And at Lungalunga, he met the then President of Tanzania, Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere. Now, despite a difference in policy, Nyerere and Jomo Kenyatta were very close friends. They were buddies. And shortly after that meeting, Nyerere went over to Zanzibar and convinced the government, the semi-autonomous government, which was really under Nyerere, convinced them to spare the lives of the Kenyans. And the Kenyans who were already on death row waiting to be hanged were released. Now that is the incident that my political lecturer has just been referring to, and he says that was the beginning of corruption in Kenya because it displayed open impunity. It showed that the government was on the side of the corrupt, because no laws were being followed. You'd slap somebody in the corridors of the High Court, somebody who had revealed your name, concerning a corruption scam. Absolutely nothing would happen to you. Meanwhile, a poor innocent man would be jailed for speaking the truth, really. Very, very fascinating incident. And it tells us a lot about where corruption in Kenya really started. And indeed, it informs us of our current situation today and the chances of us ever being able to do anything about this monster that has consumed the entire country called Kenya. Now, we will continue in the second episode of this amazing, enthralling series, where we're going to reveal quite a lot more from this amazing, spectacular interview with my political lecturer. Make sure you catch it. You know the usual drill. Look out for the link on your top left-hand corner. As soon as that video is ready, you'll be able to go straight to it and discover a few more explosive things. See you there. This is Chris Kumekucha.